Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com, making at least one video today, and apparently my cat Kaja has decided he's claiming the myself and the video to his ownership. This cat's trying to do. This cats seem to do, actually. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed, by the way. Thank you for those who have subscribed recently. I really appreciate that. So, alright, so leaving off, this is the top 30 now for modern progressive art rock albums. Next is the Stiletto Formal, the only album from this band, the Stiletto Formal, band from Arizona, from 2008, their album Fiesta, 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 Fiesta. They're a pretty unknown band, although it's amazing how many times I've seen this CD, like at cheapo and at half-price books locally in Minnesota. But it just was one of those records that came out late in 2008, October 21st. And I mean, I don't think I'd even heard of them. I don't remember where I heard about them. One of the blog, it wasn't exactly like Apes and Androids, but it was weird. All I know is that I heard about this record and listened to it, and it was like, well, this is like the Mars Volta with cello, and that does capture it a lot. But the thing about it is I listened to it more and more, and it just got to be so addictive. The energy on this record is off the charts at times. I mean, I suppose from a top, whatever, how many albums list, you're talking about bands with an original sound, a highly original sound. No, I mean, it's the band's members themselves wouldn't deny that, you know, yeah, we're kind of highly influenced by the Mars Volta, or at the Drive-In they were also compared to, but the songwriting is just really good. We Are the Muckrakers, 6 p.m. your time, Nightcap at the Santa Fe. We're Sleeping Our Way to the Top featuring Murs. I mean, some of the lyrics are a little bit, the word isn't cheesy. It's a little kind of dark, I suppose, in a way. Bearskin Rugs of the Future, the title track. It's just I'm a sucker for when you use cello with rock music. There's a few other bands that came out around this time that featured that. I mean, of course, you had Anathello, you had the chamber bands, the Deer Hunter used it, but you also had the band Grammatics had it. And there's a few others that just the cello was sort of in vogue. Well, even Judgment Day and Apocalyptica, of course, doing the Metallica covers, and then they did the original music. Cello was really a popular instrument with some styles of rock music around that time. So, but you know, it was one of those cases where I couldn't believe how addicted I got to this record. There's another thing was I was doing production-based work that I would go to my music and the energy would just go through, and I got so attached to it that I just was like, this is a perfect record in a lot of ways. I don't know, you know, I haven't listened to it a lot in many years, but oh, Kiss Kiss was another one. You know, I wonder if that's who I heard about it from. A friend of mine that was telling me that this band's a little bit like the best album the Mars Volta never recorded. So, yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of the Mars Volta, or like that band that came out last few years, the Mass the Phantasm, this is a band that well worth seeking out. This is their only album. They had a couple EPs, I guess, too, but and then there were no more. I know the lead singer, Kyle, what was his last name? Howard, ended up like moving to LA. Although there was some talk about them doing a second record, but he was going to be doing like, I don't know if he did, he's been doing score, you know, like for films, that kind of stuff, like a lot of these musicians like Matt Mahaffey and Jason Nesmith and what's his name, Fido Xavier have done just to make a living. I guess Neil DeGrade, you know, from Dirtper Robbins has done some of that. But yeah, this is just, it's one of those just energy records that is so good that it's just, you know, I loved it. I have to go back to it. I wonder if it might be on Spotify, because many of these records I haven't listened to in a number of years, and to see if it still holds up. But in 2008, it was one of many records that I just completely couldn't get enough of. The Stiletto Formal, their album Fiesta, 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 Fiesta from 2008 at number 30. Number 29, the debut album, self-titled debut album from the Steven Wilson and Aviv Geffen sort of art pop, melancholy, progressive pop rock album, or band, Blackfield rather. And I actually didn't hear this album until 2005. I don't know why I didn't. I should have known about it, but this, and I have the vinyl, I think, fold up again. The Blackfield's a weird band in that when this came out, when I got into this album and then the second album came out, I was pretty in awe of them. I didn't like them as much as Porcupine Tree, but it was just like splitting hairs almost and something. I thought this was just one of the most melancholy albums ever. Most the saddest. And part of it also is with this album. Yeah, I think that was it, because it was the fall of 2005. The head of, or the person who created the MySpace group for Porcupine Tree and Blackfield passed away in an accident. She was only 17 years old. His name was Ariel Daniel, in like outside the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin, in a train accident. But she loved Porcupine Tree and Steven Wilson, and sadly she never got to even hear any of his solo music. But I remember when I found out she passed away, because I actually had messaged her a few times on MySpace when MySpace was, the biggest thing. It was bigger than Facebook, of course, in 2005. And this album, I went to this, and I was right when I was getting into Hours, the debut album from Hours, captured so much of what I was feeling about. This is just so sad at points. It captured everything about what happened with that situation with her past. It was another girl too with her that was a few years younger. There's these high school kids, these youth that were trying to take pictures of trains and maybe were a little misguided and not really being looked after by whoever should be, their parents or whoever else. But actually Steven Wilson, I signed his like website. He had like a blog or a journal or something like that, or a guest book. It was a guest book, I think, on his website at the time. I don't know if he still has that. And he actually got back in touch with me. He wanted to find out more detail about it. And then I know later Porcupine Tree dedicated a song to her at the show in Milwaukee. I didn't see it, unfortunately. But anyway, Blackfield, the debut album, is just, it's perfect melancholy pop. That's the best way to put it. Every track, every one of these songs is just gut-wrenchingly sad, and beautiful at the same time. I don't, which ones I like sort of lean toward, Cloudy Now, Scars, the title track, Open Mind, Pain is a terribly hard song sometimes, I think, when I hear that song. Hello, it's so dreamy and sad. It's just that whole experience with Ariel and just other things that I've dealt with. This has always been a go-to, just from a sort of misery love company kind of thing. So, yeah, this is a fantastic record from the debut album from Blackfield in 2004. At number 29, I gotta get back to the list, of course. So, rounding out this portion of the list on Rate Your Music, another Porcupine Tree album, and the top Porcupine Tree album on here. So you got Steven Wilson 1-2 punch here toward this part of the list. Lightbulb Sun from 2000. I know that, of course, Gavin Harrison wasn't the drummer on this album. It was Chris Maitland, although the drumming is really good on this album. I recently did a top songs list. I'm doing my top songs list. I probably need to do some videos about them from different years. The year 2000, and I probably had 5 or 6 tracks from this album on there, from the title track to How's Your Life Today. The piano part, the Beatles-ish element is great on that. She's Moved On is probably my favorite song on here. Very dreamy. Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth Before It's Recycled, about that, was it Branch Davidian cult that took their own lives. They were saying they were going to ascend to another plane, but that they use samples in that, and that's a great track. The Rest Will Flow, Hate Song. The last 2 track, Rush on Ice, I like, although it's a little long, it's a little slow. It's like a slow burn, almost like slowcore in a way. It still works. The string sections are great on it, though. It's not one I go to as often as some of the other songs on this album. Feel So Low is just kind of, there's the melancholy with it. But this also has a huge amount of sentimental value for me, this album, Lightbulb Sun, because when I got into them, this was the newest album. I saw them at Nearfest in June of 2001, and that previous winter, when I knew they were going to be playing there, I'd heard a lot about Porcupine Tree, not really listened to that much of their music. I can't remember when I was doing KFA radio if we played a lot from this or the previous records. We might have, but I remember first hearing their name, it was like that tour actually the previous year. I remember being in line going to was at the Dream Theater day at Mars Music for the signing with Mike Portnoy. Someone mentioned them. I'd never heard their name, so it was a while, before this before that whole period of time when I got into them that I'd heard their name. But yeah, I just I kind of think it was nostalgia was the one that made me a fan, and then I just kind of felt like, well, I love a lot of the other records. This is the album that sort of worked the best beginning to end. Really aren't any songs that I actually do skip. And it's sort of a little better than the sum of its parts. Four chords that made $1 million. That was, against the pop music industry. And then Hate Song. That's the one that's that's the heaviest song probably on here. That's a really tight groove to it. That's a song that they could have written for probably an Absentia. It's almost like foreshadowing what they do with the heavier, almost metallic element. But anyway, Lightbulb Sun from Porcupine Tree from the year 2000. Number 28 on the list. So go on to the next 5. And number 27, Mew, Frengers, from 2003. The album that really made me a fan of Mew, really, because I heard the album that followed it first, and I wasn't really getting into them at that point. This album, I don't know what it was about it exactly. The first couple songs, especially Am I Right? No, 156. And then my favorite song probably on this album is She's Spider. That track, the riff on that is just crazy heavy at times. And it's just the energy is just so good on that song. It's a dark song lyrically. And then of course Comforting Sounds. That's a lot of people's go-to or number one track, number one Mew song in general. Snow Brigade is great. The vocal effects and the guest singer and symmetry. Eight flew over when was destroyed. She came home for Christmas. This is basically a perfect record itself. Behind the Drapes. I think this is the album from Mew that I've listened to the most. And I can't just not mention, of course, they have 2 previous records to this, and nearly every one of these songs was recorded on both of those records at points or on B-sides. I'm not sure if She Spider was. The Mew fans would crucify me, but most of these were. But the definitive versions, a little bit like Kevin Gilbert or Fair to Midland or 3 did this a couple times. The definitive versions clearly are on these versions. This was the first major label album, the first album that got distribution in America, I believe. I think it might have been produced by Rich Kotze. I can't remember who tells who. Yep, it was Rich Kotze. So, a much bigger production. It's pretty much the same thing what Fair to Midland did with Fables from a Mayfly, where they took a lot of their previous songs and re-recorded them with much cleaner, bigger, more layered production, and it paid off. I mean, I liked a lot of the earlier versions too, but the definitive versions for me and many others are the versions on this album, Frengers. Some people consider Am I Right? No their best song, and I can totally understand that. The people on the Mew X podcast have talked about that. 156 is just dreamy. It sounds very 80s-ish. So, yeah, if you've never heard Mew, this is probably the best place to start. Most people would recommend this record. So anyway, Frengers from 2003 from Mew, number 27. Number 26, Act 4 Rebirth and Reprise from The Deer Hunter from 2015. I did the Deer Hunter series of videos included on this enough. And I'm still kind of like with this record, I love this record, and it's by many people's taste, it's almost divided. It's like 50-50, but half the large the hardcore fans consider this their best work. And I mean, it has many of their best songs. Like if you took a list of the top, if I do my top 10, I do my top songs from the Deer Hunter, don't be surprised if this album has the most songs in it on that list, or at least it may have, at least in the top 10 to 20, at least 10, 20. Anyway, from Waves, which is just a perfect pop ballad track. It's so dreamy and earwormy. To A Night in the Town, of course, which is like the Deer Hunter in a nutshell in a way. It's like it with the the callbacks to like Act 2, especially some of the other acts. But it's just orchestrated so well, the segues, and that's if you've never heard the Deer Hunter, a great song to hear, of course. The Old Haunt, one of my favorites. I love the crescendo in that piece. The squeaky wheel is really catchy, and of course, even more catchy is King of Swords Reversed, which, you could say Waves could have been a pop song. That could have been a pop song too. It's a more overtly pop. Totally energetic, totally catchy, totally earwormy. The Bittersweet 4 and 5. Remember, at the End of the Earth is dreamy. This is the production, the artwork even. There's a ton to just love about this record, and why, while I have some of the other Deer Hunter albums on this list, they're not quite as high as this album. So, my only kind of, and I've kind of grown a little bit to accept it, is that the album feels like it should end right after either King of Swords or If All Goes Well. Like the last 3 or 4 tracks sound like bonus tracks in a weird way. And of course, this is a concept, one of the fourth of the fifth of the 5 or potentially 6 part concept of the Axe and Hunter, the protagonist of sorts. So they obviously fit within the concept and story here. But I just, from a musical standpoint, the line is one I always think of Galactic Cowboys. It has that, I think it's the line. It's either the line or Wait. That there's a song from, I think, from Space in Your Face that has the same kind of riff and melody. Anyway, but again, this is a Lightbulb Sun. There's a lot of nostalgia, and I feel like from beginning to end, this is an album that I'm in awe of at times. Some of Casey's best songwriting and production has happened on this, and I don't doubt whether he'll be able to do things potentially better, but if somehow he never does, this may be considered his last masterpiece among masterpieces. But again, that's sacrilege. I know he's talked about Antimai blowing the Antimai, not Antimai, but the stuff he's been working on for the Indigo Child blowing this out of the water, so, and all the Axe albums combined, of course. So anyway, Act 4, Rebirth and Reprise from the Deer Hunter, number 26 from 2015. So number 25, Mutemath's Odd Soul. This album also, I've kind of, from 2011, this album, Odd Soul, I came to belief, and I mentioned this in my Mutemath video not that long ago, this became my top Mutemath album, as much as I love a handful of their other records. This album, they just kind of almost reinvented themselves in a way. The sort of the riffs, the funk, the energy, the layering, the melodies, and sort of almost surprise elements gives this album such great reason to go back to it as a go-to. I mean, it's splitting hairs. Mutemath have a catalog that's just, you go down the line and you love albums for different reasons, and it's hard to really pick and choose, but I kind of felt like after they did the self-titled and then Armistice, I was like, well, they're going to go down the similar style path of those two albums, but then the guitar player left. I'm like, what are they going to do? Are they going to be even half as good? And sort of unexpectedly, this album really became really good and that much better. Not that much better, but became surprisingly just better than I would have ever expected it. From the title track, Odd Soul, the opening, Blood Pressure, Prytania, Allies and Cavalries, those are two of my go-tos. The energy on those two and the way they segue are great. Quarantine, All or Nothing. I love this album, really. Some people were kind of hard on it, but harsh on it. The production is just magical on this. That's part of the other reason why I think that's a step up in production. I don't think, while I love Play Dead, their last record, a lot too, I don't think they ever really had this kind of, almost vintage 70s sounding, but sort of clean and pristine sounding at the same time production on any of the other records. A bunch of my people made comments about that. It's like, how did they do this? I mean, some people said it's like garage rock, but it's like garage rock production done, I don't know how to say it. It's like very organic sounding is a better way to put it. The garage element, which I always think down upon, people comparing them to the Black Keys here. It's like taking a really, like a 70s album and just having that warm, clean feeling about it, organic sounding, element to it, and it just works so well from a production standpoint. So I appreciate production. It's not the number one thing, but I appreciate production, and that's partly why this became my favorite Mutemath album. Why it ended up at number 25. Number 24. Speaking of really good production, Imogen Heap's second album, breakthrough album, of course, called "Speak for Yourself" from 2005. This is my top Imogen Heap album, of course, too. She doesn't have a very large catalog, but it of course has the track that everyone knows her for, "Hide and Seek," which is a marvelous track. It's very creative use of vocoder within pop, unlike really none other done that well before. I mean, you could say some other artists have used vocoder, but not in this way. But looking past just "Hide and Seek," which I haven't really gotten sick of. It's like Tom Sawyer from Rush or something. I still will listen to it and like it. You have just a handful of just unbelievably catchy earworm pop tracks. The other thing I'll say that why this album means a lot to me is because up until this point I wasn't really that versed, or just I wasn't listening to a lot of female artists, and she was like the first female artist that sort of hit me over the head with a ton of bricks. She is absolutely brilliant. And she's classically trained, of course. I was like, she's a goddess. She got this great vocal range and great way to use her voice, and within the confines of making pop songs. Headlock, Good Night and Go, Have You Got It In You, Clear the Area, Daylight Robbery, The Walk. It's like track after track, hook after hook. I've went to this album so many times when I either was having a bad day or just it's very uplifting. Then you have the song, which is probably my favorite track on it, the closing track, "The Moment I Said It," which that is, as a contrast to the record, very melancholy in a way, very emotional. It's like this burst of emotion of sort of not anger, but just sort of like some event happening that I don't know if it was inspired by personal relationships and or things like 9/11 and some other things like that. But the other thing I get from it is like my love of Dream Theater specifically. I mean, I like a lot of Dream Theater, the first half of their career, namely, but the first couple albums, and Kevin Moore specifically, this song almost sounds like a song that either could have been a chroma key track, like that song On the Page a little bit, or could have been a song he wrote with Dream Theater if it was not so guitar driven. I know that Jeff Beck does a solo on one. There's not a ton of guitar on this album, but Jeff Beck does a guitar solo on, I want to say, might be "Have You Got It In You?" Anyway, Just For Now is another one. Although she does that song live, and it's even better, where she does these like layered echoing vocal effects. They're like "Row, Row, Row Your Boat," the way Savatage did with Chance, of course, and Queen did, and a lot of other artists. But no, getting back to "The Moment I Said It," yeah, it's that build up. Dun, 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 dun. It's not even light out. It's haunting. It's beautiful. It's melancholy. Yeah, again, like Space Divests, like from Dream Theater's Awake album, an absolute favorite of mine among their catalog. It totally captured that. Like, I haven't heard too many other songs that use piano in such an emotional, melancholy, passionate way. I could make a list. I should try to come up with a list, make a playlist on Spotify or on YouTube of that. But that is one of just a few select tracks I can totally feel like has captured that emotion. The Deer Hunter has a couple songs, like you could say Mandala almost does in some ways too, but anyway, "Speak for Yourself" by Imogen Heap, just an absolute album I absolutely adore, an all-time classic, number 24 on this list from 2005. Number 23, okay, so now we got the next, and this is the top and final album from the Mars Volta, Francis the Mute, came out March 1st, 2005, and while, some people, a lot of fans really enjoy this album, but flip-flop it between this and, Deloused in the Comatorium is clearly their number one. This is my number one for a handful of reasons. I feel they were more prog on this for one reason. I mean, that shouldn't necessarily mean, you could say, well, some of the record that followed, Ambitexture, was more prog in some ways. And I wouldn't disagree with that. But the way the crescendos, the build-ups, the sort of the climaxes on a few of these epics on this record happen, it's absolutely perfection. It's prog rock perfection in a lot of ways. I know some people criticize them because they do a lot of jazz psych noodling in the middle, and I have that issue with some other music. You know, Pure Reason Revolution has a song that I'm going to talk about pretty soon here, but like has that. You know, there's like KO Dot and some other bands that do a lot of this noodling and stuff. These stuff that just doesn't flow, that doesn't seem to really fit, and then could be chopped up in there. I just find there's other examples like Green Carnation's Light of Day, Day of Darkness, or like the songs Cygnus, Vismund Cygnus, and especially Cassandra Gemini. The spots that are sort of low key and meditative totally work in a flow standpoint and are totally worth getting to the climaxes. Godspeed You, Black Emperor, when they write really, really wonderful, amazing pieces themselves, are totally like in similar league with those two pieces. Then you have a song like La Via La Vasquez, or La Via Livila, I can never pronounce that right, which is, it's a 12-minute track, but the meat of the song, at least the large thing you think of it, most people, is that sort of Carlos Santana, heavy, funky, you know, in your face, punchy riff that is impossible to not forget. And, you know, Cedric is singing in Spanish and everything, of course. You have The Widow, which is a nice ballad, and Miranda the Ghost, which is probably my least favorite part of this record, but I still enjoy. No, this is a masterpiece in a lot of ways. In fact, I probably should bump it up to at least 4.5. There we go. You see my rating change. But yeah, this had a lot. I mean, I love Delouse in the Crematorium, but they added like trumpet and a lot more jazz elements, a lot more color. The vocal parts are better. The production's better. You know, the first album had Rick Rubin producing. I can't remember if they had a producer on this. I know that was the last album. This was the last album, I think, that actually had a producer. They self-produced after this, I think. Yeah, it wasn't Rick Rubin, but no, I mean, and I think, you know, initially I think this wasn't as well received as Delouse, but it's sort of become 50-50, as I was saying, and it's good to see. And I think most people, like the prog rock fan base, lean more toward this one. But, you know, it's not a competition. I still love Delouse in the Crematorium, but I just felt like they sort of went more off the deep end in such a great way. Although, in fairness, it's not an album like some of the albums on this list that I've listened to that much the last decade, especially. I would go back to it. Of course, we had the vinyl version that came out in that box set, you know, and there was like a remix or something. And so I did listen to it, that Landscape Tantrums or whatever. So I've listened to it a little bit over the last couple of years. But, you know, it's a mood record still at the same time. So if I'm listening to the Mars Volta, this is always going to be my first choice. And I, you know, it's iconic in a lot of ways. Both their first two records are both iconic, but to me, this is like the people that want to, you know, look down upon alternative rock or with prog or whatever, indie rock with prog. I just say, you know, listen to this and tell me you don't hear Zeppelin, you don't hear Yes, you don't hear, you know, a lot of other bands, Santana, of course, and then, you know, because there's a lot of the percent of the prog fan base that they want pure 100% prog, but some of them have a classic rock, you know, interest too, and so they're like, well, all right, you know. So, and it was really ambitious at the time. I think the record after it was maybe more ambitious, but this worked much better on a success standpoint. It's just, you know, I get goosebumps when I hear those climaxes. It's just, they're so good. You know, the instrumentation, even the little thing where Cedric's going beyond the melting cones, and he's like, you think of like ice cream or sherbet or something like that. You're like walking through the desert and you see a mirage, or it's like it's like an ice cream cone or a push-up or something, like a push-up. I always thought of like orange flavored push-ups. Like if it was like 95 degrees out and you're in the middle of the desert and you had an orange, I think of when he does that little thing about the melting cones. Because, you know, ice cream cones or whatever else, I don't know. I mean, a lot of their lyrics are always nonsensical. So, you know, they're really singing the lyrics, a lot of these words of some of the songs too, of course, based on how they sound to sing and say and enunciate and pronounce, as opposed to what they lyrically mean. I know this is a concept album like a lot of the records. Of course, this album had Ike, right, the late keyboard player among others, and Juan Alderete. So it had some of the people that haven't worked with them, on the new album or whatever. So anyway, number 23, the Mars Volta's Francis the Mute. So moving on, I'll at least do two more here. I mean, what am I looking at for time here? We're looking at 30 minutes or I'll have to just squeeze in these last two and then maybe a video later. So Dredge, by the same year, so not really rivals, but it was weird because these albums came out the same year. Catch Without Arms in 2005. This was the first Dredge album the new album that came out. This was really what introduced me in some ways. Like I got to listen to the other two records that had previously released, like a mix of songs before that for a couple months, and they came here that May before this came out. And they played a bunch of songs live from this album, of course, Catch Without Arms. But this was really, I look at sort of my generation Dredge album. I sadly wasn't around earlier than this. I wish I had been. I'd heard the name. And in 2005, Deadwing and Francis the Mute and Catch Without Arms, I listened to a ton. I had started my new job within that year, and I was listening to a lot of music, new music to just sort of do my work to. I also associate this album with, I would buy Granny Smith, the greenish apples. And I'd frequently eat that in the morning while I listened to this. It was a weird ritual. I should do it again sometime, maybe on an anniversary or something. But, and of course I have the vinyl on here. But I love this album. It's super catchy. It's super polished. Is it as progressive rock slanted as, say, some of their other records? Probably not as much, although there's definitely some in there. My go-tos if I'm picking tracks, Hungover on a Tuesday has always been my like favorite, because I love the riff on that, and the drum, the snare part that Dino plays. Bug Eyes was a song that got a little bit of airplay and was, they had the single with the DVD at Best Buy that I bought for a penny. I bought like 100 of them and started handing them out to people. Ode to the Sun, great opening riff on that track. The dynamics are great. Sang Riel, like I was talking about Porcupine Tree's Halo, there's a similarity with that little piano, on that song. There's a rhythm that's similar to that, but I really enjoy that track. Tanbarka's Hot Lava, that was a live staple as well. Jemai Vu, that was, you could say after I saw them live, that was the song that won me over. Like, I'm not sure about all these other songs, but Jemai Vu, very Pink Floyd-y, very kind of, it's like a ballad almost, where that the Mark Engels that picking he uses, I don't know, it's tremolo picking or whatever, is just so warm and mesmerizing at times on that song, and not the only song they do. The title track, Not That Simple, is fantastic. I grew to like that more and more. It's kind of poppy, but the segue on that, and the vocal parts from Gavin Hayes are just fantastic. Plus, another thing about this record that has always stood out to me are the lyrics. Unlike the Mars Volta, these are much more relatable, lyrics that, in some 10 years have gone, it's much too long. I hear lyrics from this album all the time in my head. I reference it or I think of it frequently. Matryoshka, the ending track, The Ornament, is fantastic as well. Very dreamy. The sad thing is there were a few tracks that didn't even make this album that were great too. They were on like B-sides, Uplifting News and Stone by Stone. Stone by Stone was on the live album that came out the next year, live at the Fillmore. But so they were kind of hitting on all cylinders. It also had hitting on all cylinders. Chris DeGarmo, formerly of Queensryche, he worked with them on this. Plus Terry Date, who produced the first Dream Theater album, actually, so they had some people that I knew that worked with them. It's interesting. I mean, does it have a little bit of a sameness sound? Yeah, a lot of the songs are in a similar key. But the criticism doesn't fit for me. It's just the songs themselves and the energy, the things just to enjoy about it are so good that it just, I think Spit Shine is like the only song on here that I'm sort of less, it doesn't really compare to maybe any of the other songs on here, but it's still not bad. But Catch Without Arms is a staple record, and it's probably my most listened to, without question, my most listened to Dredge album also. So anyway, number 20, what is it? Number 20, I'm going back here. 22, Catch Without Arms from 2005, number 22. from Dredge. Number 21, another top record for me, Light Chasers from Cloud Cult from 2010. I went from basically being a, like, knowing their name to then becoming a casual fan with the last album, Feel Good Ghost, which was a fair amount down the list, but it's still an album I love and I have a nostalgia for. To basically, when I heard this album, I was like, now they've done it. They've pretty much put themselves at the top of like one of my favorite bands, the last couple decades. And, in Minnesota, they're arguably my favorite band of all bands from Minnesota. This is a concept album. I mean, most of their records are concept albums. It's tied to the loss of their the main song, Craig and Connie Minowa, their child, Caden. But beyond that, it's just sort of a concept about like a sort of a trip, a journey. A little bit, I think of Battlestar Galactica because it's talking about a spaceship trying to get home. Battlestar Galactica or like Star Trek Voyager in a way. It's just the energy is great on this record, but it's epic. I mean, it's 55 minutes, 55. That's kind of weird. There's some longer, like, multi-part pieces like they've done before. I mean, of course, they're connected. They reprise certain parts, rather. Because they have, like, subtitles to these songs or whatever. The Departure, The Birth, The Baby. If I went to go-tos, I mean, it's definitely better than the sum of its parts, Light Chasers. I kind of lean toward Room Full of People in Your Head. Yeah, because I think of this song just as known as the Room Full of People in Your Head. That one, with the horn parts and the sort of the time changes and stuff like that, that's maybe their most proggy track on this album. But, the arrival that lasts, there's the energy, so much energy. I get into tears. It's so emotional. Of course, it has Running with the Wolves, which is known as The Escape. Again, people just know that song as Running with the Wolves more so. That got on like commercials and stuff, and in some ways it's maybe their best song. It's like their most concise, their best song that was the most concise and sort of earwormy and memorable and inspiring. I think of someone who literally is leaving home and won't see their family anymore, and they're just kind of saying, sorry, I have to go because I need to do this, but I love you, but please, disconnect my phone. And, it's sad. It's very, if you think about it, if that were to happen to myself, or, it just would be hard to take, but it's like there's got to be a reason because there's something better to go to. My only issue is there's a couple songs toward the first half that I kind of, You Were Born, Craig is kind of singing really close to the mic. I'm not crazy. The Baby, that one, and The Birth. Those two are like, this was like a 5-star record easily if I could correct a couple, like I took out a little moments on those songs. Other than that, I mean, Responsible, let's see here, Journey to the Light. I mean, Forces of the Unseen. It's heavy, this might be in some ways their heaviest record, actually. It's not metal, but there's some really heavy riffs and heavy like cello parts and everything like that. So, yes, I love this record, and I go back and forth in some ways. The Seeker is less is more in some ways. This is more, but it's not too much to be more, more is more enough, you could say almost. Anyway, Light Chasers from 2010. I know they really worked hard on this record. It may be their most invested record, although they have so many records. Anyway, that's 21, so that closes out this chunk of 10. If I have time, I'll do another 10 today, although I do have a vinyl and a CD to show, so I don't know if I'll have to resume the countdown tomorrow on Thursday. But anyway, again, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.